As you have probably discerned, with each progressive section, we get deeper and deeper into the details of importing into the United States via ocean freight. That trend isn't going to change any in Section 10. In fact, it's going to get more intense with an analysis of full container load shipping, the pricing model. What are the charges and how do they work around full container load shipping? FCL pricing is based on the use of a container for a specified time period, a 20-footer, a 40-footer, a 40 high cube, but it can only be used for a certain amount of time. We'll get into that in a couple of slides. Second bullet, the specific charges associated with using an ocean container will depend on the type of services contracted for. For example, we've talked a bit about CY to CY moves, container yard to container yard, port to port, essentially synonymous terms. An importer can also contract for door-to-port services, where the charges include the drayage from the vendor's factory, wherever it might be, all the way to the port of discharge in the United States. The rate paid will include the drayage from the supplier's facility at origin to the port of export. And then importers can contract for door-to-door, where the pricing includes just that, all of the transportation charges from the factory door to the final destination in the United States. What importers contract for is a matter of preference, a matter of strategy. We'll get into those different strategies as we continue on. Third bullet, pricing can be presented on an all-in basis with a single fee that covers allegedly everything, with no ancillary charges listed. Or pricing can also be itemized. One's preference might be to see itemized pricing. It's certainly a good approach to take. We're not here to say one is better than the other, but the more detail you can have, the better off you're going to be. As a note, before we get too far along, let's say that there is an upcoming section that covers all types of ocean documentation in a comprehensive manner. So we're not going to talk too much about bills of lading here or forwarder's cargo receipts, advanced ship notices. We have a whole section, multiple slides, dedicated to those documents. We're just talking about pricing here. Let's jump into some of the charges that may be levied on an FCL import, which may include, they don't have to include all of these, it depends, but they certainly might include, for example, a container stuffing fee at origin. When a freight forwarder receives cargo into a CFS and then stuffs a container on behalf of a U.S. importer, there's a charge for that, sometimes called a CFS fee. That's one of the key services that a freight forwarder will provide at a CFS. Also, charges for drayage to the origin port of export, sometimes called the port of loading, the POL. That could be part of the charge as well to the U.S. importer. Chassis usage fee at origin, those chassis are not free. Typically in the U.S., chassis are about $35 a day. More on that later as well. Perhaps an origin container yard fee, the CY fee, depends on the terminal, the port that one is exporting from, but that could be in there too. THC, origin terminal handling charge or terminal handling fee. Verified gross mass weighing fee, that's VGM. The last section of the ocean module deals with VGM, so we'll talk more about that later. Of course, the main mode of transport, the ocean transportation itself. Kind of hard to move ocean cargo without having a charge to do so. Another, sometimes confusing for importers, is what's called BAF, a bunker adjustment factor. Anytime you hear the term bunker in the ocean world, it is the type of fuel that ships use to power their engines. That's what bunker is. It's just a type of fuel. Documentation fees to cut a bill of lading, etc., also part of that pricing model, or potentially part of that pricing model to the U.S. importer. Here's some sample FCL pricing. Base rates with bunker and arbitrary charges. This is a busy little slide. Luckily, we have that zoom feature that we can depend upon, but it's pretty telling. And we will begin by saying that while these are actual rates from an actual quotation, they vary dramatically from month to month and year to year, especially these days in such a volatile ocean freight market. Let's have a look and see. Upper left-hand corner. The rates are on a CY to CY basis. Container yard to container yard. The most basic of full container load ocean shipping services. Under the Incoterm FOB port, that tells us that the vendor is responsible for paying the drayage up to the port of loading. That's what Incoterms do. They tell us who's responsible for paying for what. So we can tell right away that this is straight up port to port, CY to CY, synonymous terms there. Rates based on an FOB port. POD, that stands for port of discharge, either LA or Long Beach. And they are two different ports. Sometimes people think they're one. They actually are two. Before we jump into looking at some of the numbers here, and the numbers aren't as important as the structure of this slide, we're going to look at some of the titles from left to right. POL, port of loading. So this importer clearly has vendors in places like Haiphong, Ho Chi Minh City, Hong Kong, Huangpu, and down the list we go. These are the origin ports, the ports of loading. POD typically stands for port of discharge. Sometimes it means proof of delivery. That's another logistics term that is out of place here. POD in the ocean world is port of discharge. Here it clearly says either LA or Long Beach. They are different ports, but they're right next to each other. The carrier. This takes us back to our section on ocean alliances. Here, they're not listing, at least right away, specific carriers. Whoever provided this quotation, whatever NVOCC provided this quotation, is saying that the carriers are the members of the Ocean Alliance, the Alliance, and then it looks like Wanhai, WHL, and PIL, another different ocean carrier. TT, that stands for transit time. From port to port, CY to CY. From that point to the right, we start looking at the actual ocean freight. We have base ocean freight, and as the name would indicate, that's just the straight-up ocean transportation charge from container yard to container yard. But you'll notice below that there is pricing for 20-footers, 40-footers, 40 high cubes, and 45-foot high cubes. We'll come back to the numbers in just a moment. To the right of that, bunker. We just defined bunker as the type of fuel that container ships burn. Not unusual at all to have an additional charge separately itemized for bunker by container size. Arbitrary. This is a little bit different. And you'll notice most of the ports here in the numbers section, they don't have anything. It's just a zero, no charge. But places like a Haiphong, Huangpu, Taichung, they do have arbitrary charges. We'll talk more about arbitraries in just a little bit, but as you can see, these are typically not super large, super busy ports that oftentimes actually have to barge containers from that smaller port down to a larger port. We see that in China all the time. Well, that barge fee has a cost associated with it, and oftentimes that's what represents the arbitrary charge. Last column, total ocean freight, where you add up base plus bunker plus any arbitrary to get to the complete fee. We'll stick to the total column because we could spend hours analyzing this particular slide, but a couple of things that we should really point out here. So let's stick at total ocean freight on the far right-hand side. 20-foot container. Pick an origin. Here's one that we haven't talked about much. Ho Chi Minh City. For a 20-footer, that's $1,050 US. For a 40-footer, from the same port going to the same destination, $1,300. Logically, one might think, well, if a 40-footer is $1,300, shouldn't a 20-footer be $650? That would be the logical mathematical approach to take. That's not how it works in ocean freight. 20-footers, honestly, are kind of a pain in the butt for ocean carriers because they have to be given the same tender loving care, but they don't carry as much cargo. So that ratio, $650 for a 20, $1,300 for a 40, it doesn't apply in the ocean freight world. So we need to move beyond that whole misconstrued belief, if in fact one has that belief. Conversely, moving across to the 40 high cube, it's the same price as a 40-footer. That is not always the case. This is what is referred to as common rating, where 40s and 40 high cubes, from specific ports of loading to specific ports of discharge, have the same fee. That's something that an importer has to look to negotiate. That's not an automatic giveaway program. Common rating is what that is called. We as an importer want to pursue that. And then the 45-foot high cube, obviously, the price goes up, in this case to $1,533. So we can go through the pricing. Honestly, there's really no need to because the pricing changes anyway. We're talking about structure, how pricing works, what should be included in what is admittedly a rudimentary quotation, the type of service, CY to CY, on an FOB port basis, port of loading, port of discharge, carrier, transit time, base, bunker, and arbitrary fees for total ocean freight, and off we go. This is a real quote, applied in the real world, and done so in a very effective fashion. This is a good example. Continuing on with our pricing model. Moving into a destination environment now. Here in the United States, well, there could be a destination terminal handling fee, a THC, terminal handling charge at destination. It depends on the port. Currency adjustment factor, CAF as it's called. That is when a currency conversion takes place for ocean transportation fees from, let's say, Chinese renminbi to the US dollar, or euro to the US dollar, that there is an adjustment factor associated with the currency to account for any fluctuations in that currency from the time goods left origin until they got to destination. A big one, chassis usage fees at destination. We mentioned here in the United States, going rate, certainly West Coast United States, $35 a day. That's charged to the importer from having a container offloaded a ship, put on a chassis, drayed out to a destination. And there also can be destination demurrage and destination detention fees. Demurrage and detention can be very confusing. We're going to clarify that confusion in the last slide of this section coming up right now. Well, this supply chain perspective is aptly titled, given our most recent comment. It's about demurrage versus detention fees. One aspect of ocean transportation that can be a source of confusion is the difference between detention and demurrage fees. Both are related to the general term late fees, but each has its own distinct meaning. In both cases, daily demurrage and detention fees are levied on full container load shipments. Second paragraph. Demurrage fees are charged by steamship lines and/or terminal operators when a BCO doesn't arrange for pickup of containers in a timely fashion from an ocean terminal. Typically, a carrier will offer a certain amount of free time, and beyond that, the BCO is charged for demurrage. So we as an importer, a BCO, we might ask ourselves, well, what's the problem if we don't come and get the container right away from the ocean terminal? Well, terminals don't have infinite space, and they want containers that are loaded off of ships out of there as soon as they clear through customs. That's a logical approach to take. The only real inspiration sometimes that MTOs have, marine terminal operators have, is to charge a fee if BCOs don't arrange for pickup of their containers in a timely fashion. That fee is called demurrage. Third paragraph. Detention fees, on the other hand, are charged when an importer has recovered a container from an ocean terminal but doesn't return it in a timely fashion. Once a container departs a terminal, it also has a certain amount of free time. If the BCO holds a container beyond the free time period, daily detention fees begin to accrue. Detention fees can be negotiated with carriers, NVOs, terminals, etc. It's not a fixed time. Maybe it's 10 days, maybe it's 15 days. But one thing is certain, free time should be stipulated in a carrier service contract as well as an NVOCC arrangement and be explicitly stated. So everybody knows from the get-go that after 10 days go by, after 7 days go by, whatever it is, detention fees start to accrue. We as the BCO have to make sure that these containers are returned to the terminal in a timely fashion. Imagine a scenario where we as the BCO, through our customs broker, freight forwarder, drayage company, whoever it might be, we pick up containers late, get hit with demurrage, and then we return them late and get hit with detention fees. It's no laughing matter, because one can easily find examples out in the real world where demurrage and detention fees on a container far exceed the actual ocean freight. This is real stuff, so we have to pay attention to it. Last sentence. In both instances, BCOs should have a clear understanding of the free time offered on containers, as well as the demurrage and detention fees associated with specific carriers and terminals. Enough said on that. We're done here. When we come back, we're sticking with pricing models, but this time it will be less than container load pricing models.